The story of Esther begins in the shadow of the great Persian Empire. Within the towering limestone walls of Susa, it is a tale of a young Jewish orphan who lived in a world where her identity was a secret and her future was uncertain. Raised by her cousin Mordecai, she learned early on that silence could be a shield and that faith was the only true anchor in a shifting world. The atmosphere of Susa was one of opulence and hidden danger, where the whims of King Ahasuerus dictated the life and death of millions. When the king's previous queen was banished for her defiance, a decree went out across the 127 provinces to find a new bride. Thousands of young women were gathered, but Esther carried a quiet spiritual grace that set her apart from all the others. She did not rely on the heavy perfumes or the golden jewelry provided by the palace eunuchs to win the king's favor. Instead, she carried herself with a humility that spoke of a power far greater than physical beauty. When she finally stood before the king, the atmosphere in the throne room shifted. He did not just see a woman. He saw a spirit that brought peace to his restless heart. Esther was crowned queen of Persia, yet she remained a stranger in her own palace, hiding her Jewish heritage as Mordecai had instructed. She lived in a golden cage, surrounded by luxury but constantly aware of the fragility of her position. Little did she know that a storm was gathering in the heart of the king's most trusted advisor, a man named Haman, whose pride would soon ignite a fire. Haman was a man consumed by his own shadow, demanding that every knee bow to his presence as he walked through the city gates. When Mordecai refused to kneel, citing his devotion to the one true God, Haman's bruised ego turned into a genocidal obsession. He did not want to punish just one man. He wanted to erase an entire race from the map of the Persian Empire forever. Using manipulation and a twisted sense of justice, Haman convinced the king that a certain group of people was a threat to the stability of the realm. A royal decree was signed in blood and ink, marking a specific day for the total destruction of the Jewish people. The news spread like a plague through the streets of Susa, turning the songs of the city into a chorus of mourning. When Mordecai heard the decree, he tore his clothes and sat in the dust, sending a desperate message to the palace. He told Esther that she could not remain silent, for if her people perished, she would surely perish with them. He uttered the words that would define her life. Who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this? Esther faced a terrifying crossroads that would lead either to a heroic legacy or a silent grave in the palace gardens. To approach the king without being summoned was an automatic death sentence, unless he extended his golden scepter toward the intruder. She felt the weight of thousands of lives resting on her young shoulders, and for a moment, the fear was almost paralyzing to her soul. Instead of rushing into the throne room with a frantic plea, Esther chose the path of spiritual preparation and deep, internal stillness. She asked Mordecai to gather the people and fast for 3 days, while she and her maidens did the same in the palace. She knew that this battle would not be won by human charm, but by the intervention of the divine hand she served. On the 3rd day, Esther dressed in her royal robes, but her true strength was the invisible armor of faith she wore underneath. She walked through the echoing halls toward the inner court, every step a testament to her surrender to the will of God. If I perish, she whispered to herself, as she stepped into the direct line of sight of the powerful king. The king sat upon his throne, a man accustomed to absolute power and instant obedience from every living soul in his presence. As his eyes landed on Esther, the tension in the room was thick enough to touch, as everyone waited for the sentence of death. But the heart of the king was moved by a grace he could not explain, and he extended the scepter toward her. With a gentle touch, Esther reached out and felt the cool metal of the scepter, realizing that her life had been spared for a purpose. The king, intrigued by her sudden appearance, offered her up to half of his kingdom, but Esther's wisdom guided her to wait. She invited the king and Haman to a private banquet, beginning a delicate game of patience and divine timing. At the first banquet, Haman felt his ego swell with pride, believing he was the only man worthy of dining with the royal couple. He left the palace with a heart full of arrogance, even ordering a massive gallows to be built for the execution of Mordecai. He was so blinded by his own perceived greatness that he could not see the trap that was closing around him. That night, the king could not sleep, and he ordered the chronicles of the kingdom to be read to him in his bedchamber. He discovered that Mordecai had once saved his life from an assassination plot, yet the man had never been honored for his loyalty. The wheels of justice began to turn in the darkness, setting the stage for a reversal that no human could have planned. In a moment of supreme irony, the king asked Haman how a man who truly pleased the king should be honored in public. Haman, thinking the honor was meant for himself, described a scene of royal robes, a crown, and a public parade through the city. The king then commanded Haman to perform these very honors for Mordecai, the man he hated with a burning passion. At the second banquet, the atmosphere was heavy with the coming judgment, though Haman was still unaware of his impending and total downfall. When the king once again asked Esther for her request, she finally spoke the truth that had been burning in her heart. She revealed that her own life and the lives of her people were being sold to a cruel and wicked enemy. The king's fury was like a sudden thunderstorm as he demanded to know the identity of the man who would dare such a thing. Esther pointed her finger directly at Haman, stripping away his mask of loyalty and exposing the predator that lived beneath his fine robes. In a final twist of fate, Haman was executed on the very gallows he had built for the innocent Mordecai. The decree of death could not be easily undone. But Esther and Mordecai were given the authority to write a new law of defense. The Jewish people were granted the right to stand and fight, turning a day of mourning into a day of miraculous victory. The mourning clothes were traded for garments of joy, and the celebration of Purim was born from the ashes of despair. Esther's journey from an orphan in the dust to a savior on the throne is a masterpiece of how God uses the small. She proved that one person, armed with nothing but courage and a surrendered heart, can dismantle the most powerful empires of the world. Her story is not just a history, it is a living reminder that you are also here for a specific time. As you reflect on the life of Esther, remember that your current position is not an accident, regardless of how small it feels. The same God who moved the heart of a king and saved a nation through a girl is watching over you. Build your walls of faith, speak your truth with grace, and trust that the divine architect is always working behind the scenes of your life. Every moment of Esther's life was a preparation for a single minute of extreme bravery that would echo through the corridors of time. She did not choose her circumstances, but she chose her response with a dignity that silenced her critics and moved the heavens. Her life teaches us that the most significant impact often comes from those who are willing to risk their comfort for a greater cause. When the world feels chaotic and the decrees of the powerful seem to threaten your peace, look back at the orphan who became a queen. Her strength was not found in her crown, but in her willingness to kneel before a higher authority than the king of Persia. She shows us that when we align our will with the divine purpose, even the most impossible obstacles begin to crumble into dust. True leadership is not about the titles we hold, but about the sacrifices we are willing to make for those who cannot defend themselves. Esther used her influence to build a bridge between a grieving people and a distant king, proving that compassion is the ultimate form of power. She was a beacon of light in a dark age, and her spirit continues to inspire those who seek justice. The legacy of Esther is a call to action for every heart that feels a stirring for something more than a mundane existence. It is a reminder that you were created with a purpose that is woven into the very fabric of the universe and its history. Do not be afraid of the giants at your gate, for the same power that protected Esther is available to you today. The cold corridors of Susa were once a place of fear for a young woman who had lost everything she once knew. But in those very halls, she found the resilience to stand against a decree of total extinction. Her story whispers to every broken heart that the end of your strength is often the beginning of a miracle that can change everything. Consider the complexity of the choices Esther had to make while navigating a court filled with spies and whispering shadows. She had to be as wise as a serpent and as gentle as a dove, balancing her royal duties with her secret mission. Her intelligence was her greatest weapon, allowing her to wait for the perfect moment when the king's heart was most open to her words. The gallows that Haman built stood as a monument to human arrogance and the belief that the powerful can crush the weak, but in the grand design of providence, those very gallows became the instrument of his own destruction. It is a powerful reminder that the weapons formed against you will not prosper when you are walking in the path of truth and divine justice. As the years passed, the story of Esther became a song of hope for a people who were often scattered and oppressed. It reminded them that their God was not distant or indifferent, but was actively involved in the politics of empires. Even when his name was not spoken aloud in the palace, his hand was visible in every coincidence and every timely decision made by a queen. Today, we often find ourselves in our own versions of Susa, facing pressures to conform and fears that threaten to silence our faith. But like Esther, we are invited to fast, to pray, and to step into the courts of influence with a spirit of surrender. Your life has the potential to be a catalyst for change if you are willing to embrace the destiny prepared for you. The jewels in Esther's crown were beautiful, but they paled in comparison to the spiritual gems of courage and integrity she carried. She proved that true beauty is found in the character of a person who is willing to die for what is right. Let her example be a mirror for your own soul, reflecting the greatness that God has placed within your very being. In the final chapters of her life, Esther remained a pillar of strength for her people, ensuring that their future was secure and bright. She did not fade into the luxury of the palace, but continued to use her voice to advocate for the vulnerable and the lost. Her influence was not a seasonal occurrence, but a lifelong commitment to the values she held dear. May you walk with the same quiet confidence that Esther possessed as she faced the king and the weight of her entire nation. The journey may be difficult and the path may be narrow, but the rewards of faithfulness are eternal and profound. Stand tall, speak clearly, and trust that the Creator of all things is guiding every single step you take in this world.